Good morning. Thank you so much for that. I'm very interested in the decolonization of existing institutional structures because I often hear people say, well, what we need to do is have Indigenous people have a seat at the table where they're not represented. And my question to that is that really what we're talking about? So are there examples yet of an institutional structure, a board structure, that has truly honored both cultures?
I'll answer your second part of your question first. There may well be. I can't think of any offhand. But I think that, ensuring that Indigenous peoples have a seat at the table is not enough. It needs to be a much deeper process than that. And I think that's what a lot of universities are coming to grips with at this point, because it's really about how do you make that space for truly make it, not just a token. I mean, there are many ways that people can say, I call it the checklist approach to reconciliation. It goes like, okay, we've had an apology, we've had a TRC, we've had now we've got, more Indigenous people sitting on our board or in our teaching in our schools or whatever. So it's tick, 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 tick. And I think the danger in that is that we can become then self-congratulatory. And that's not really addressing the structural inequities that let's face it, are based on the colonial relationship. I mean, every institution in this country comes from, it supports that system, that colonial system. So to truly decolonize those it certainly won't happen overnight. And this is why I like to think about reconciliation as a living framework, because this will be ongoing. We will all be doing this for the rest of our lives, and our children and our grandchildren. I mean, the commissioners all said quite often that, it took 7 generations to do this. It's going to take 7 generations to undo it. So it's a very long process, but I'm really, it's so important for those actual structures. So the governance structures, the very heart of university and institutional life, all of those things need to undergo this process. And so I don't think it's enough to just say that. Then we're talking about equality, and equality is fine, but it doesn't necessarily get us where we need to go. We need equity. So we need equitable systems, I think, and so I think that that's a much deeper process, and I also think it really requires that not only the personal and professional decolonize, it has to all happen together, because I think if you have people, we are all individuals working in these various environments, and I think that we need to keep it at the personal level as well. So it's our own sort of our own way of making sure. I call it sort of, I have my touchstones, they're questions that I ask myself if I'm about to do something. And so one of my touchstone questions is what I'm about to do decolonizing or recolonizing? And it's just a little way I sort of check in with myself, like, okay. And it allows me to take the time to be self-reflective. Because I think so often now we have very little time to reflect on our work, to reflect on what we're doing and how we're doing it. And I think that that's so important to link in terms of action. It's about, decolonization, and it's about being self-reflective, and then it's about deciding how to act. Because unless we check in with ourselves in that way, whether on an institutional level or a personal level, we're apt to go off in directions that we're not intending to, I think, so.
Thank you. Another question? Oh, great. Thank you.
Hi there. My name is Jocelyn Hallman, and I'm at Capilano University. Recently, I heard, speak, and also read a couple of pieces that that sentence made no sense. Sorry. Okay, let me start again. I recently saw Corey Wilson speak, and she is at BCIT, I believe, and she is an Aboriginal leader, and she said that she outright rejected the idea of the word settler, and that she felt that we were settled before Europeans arrived, thank you very much. And then I recently also read Decolonization is Not a Metaphor by Eve Tuck, and I believe it's Swain Yang, which is an academic journal article describing how when folks in education and so forth talk about decolonization, they're often using the word metaphorically to describe what they themselves are doing, when in fact decolonization is a political project that belongs to Indigenous peoples. And so it sort of seems to me like as I explore this world and try to do what I feel is right, there's almost no language that I can use that is right, you know, and I'm wondering how you negotiate that in your own practice, and any advice that you could give to those of us who are non-Indigenous people seeking to do this work.
Yeah, I think that, and I don't know the exact context of the first comment. I would certainly be the first to agree that Indigenous peoples are not settlers. What I hear more often is that if I am not a Caucasian person whose family came here years ago, then I'm not a settler. I think my own reading of the word settler is that, and I think I said it here, you know, for all of those who, it doesn't matter whether we arrived here, you know, years ago or whether we arrived here yesterday, when we come to this country and we benefit from the lands and resources of the country, which of course, you know, were taken from Indigenous peoples, then we have a responsibility as citizens to become part of this larger project. So I think that it comes with the benefits. It comes with the benefits come responsibilities. There are rights and there are responsibilities. So I guess I would say that. The second thing around decolonization, I would respectfully say that decolonization is everyone's work. And in fact, over the years, the very first time I presented at a symposium and this was early days in my PhD work, and I put it out there because I wasn't sure, you know, is this something that I should be exploring? Is this something that I should be thinking about? Because it's a very delicate balance, because for me, non-Indigenous people's work of decolonization is not about appropriating. It's about realizing that in a colonial relationship, there are two sides to that relationship. There's the colonizer and the colonized. Well, if the colonized is doing all the work, how is that going to work? So what I heard, without exception, afterwards, both in the public question period and just folks that came up and chatted with me afterwards, what I heard from people at that symposium was that, and this was, you know, as I say, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, said without exception, you have to keep doing this work because this is the piece that nobody is talking about yet. Now this was back, you know, in early 2000s. So I do think that non-Indigenous people have a huge responsibility to decolonize ourselves. And so I see it very much as, if we are not doing that work in partnership, we don't run off and do it ourselves in isolation and just, you know, think that we're going to do all this all ourselves. Oh yeah, we'll come up with the answers and here you are. No, it's about working in relationship with Indigenous peoples. And there are times when we need to do our own work in that, both personally and politically. And that prepares us to work respectfully in solidarity with Indigenous peoples, because they have their own issues to deal with and their own projects and their own concerns, and they don't have time to educate us. We need to do some of that work ourselves to lay the groundwork so that when we come to work, to walk in solidarity, to work in solidarity, we do so in a way that demonstrates that we are also actively doing our own decolonizing work, which can be very uncomfortable work. Hence the title of the book, Unsettling the Settler Within. It's very deliberate name because we have to be willing to stay in that struggle, and it's not easy, and we need to do that work. So I hope that's somewhat helpful.
Thank you. Lindsay, is there anything from the live stream that we can check in? No, we're okay there. Okay, thank you. Other questions in the back of the room there?
Hi, I'm Reiko Tagami from the Union of BC Municipalities, which is not a union, or not a labor union. I work in the local, for and with local governments around the province. And so one of the things that we see is, especially Treaty First Nations, beginning to become part of and change local government institutions and structures. And I wonder if you can comment a bit about the iterative nature of the process of decolonizing and unsettling. So an example that comes to mind that I'm still cogitating about is the Tla'amin Treaty recently came into force on the Sunshine Coast. And that First Nation had was offered the opportunity to become part of the regional district and have a seat at the table, as it were, and also become part of the regional hospital district, which for many intents and purposes is the same players. So one focuses on local services, and the other one focuses specifically on health services. And the First Nation chose to become part of one but not the other. So they were interested in the health services side and not the governance side. And so that seems to me to be a really interesting example of the two-way relationship and communication. So here was a colonial structure that was sort of trying to open itself up, and then that particular First Nation said, well, yes, but here's the terms that we want to interact on and be part of. And it strikes me that educational institutions are going to go through that too. So how can they navigate those kinds of iterative experiences?
I think that this is what self-determination is all about, and I won't presume to speak for the First Nation that you just gave the example. That's absolutely not my place to do it, and I wouldn't, and I wouldn't do that. I think what I would say is that this is why it's a living framework, because it is a very iterative process. It's a living relationship, and there will be all kinds of places and times where people, for a whole bunch of reasons, either within institutions and their structures or Indigenous communities, will choose to do one thing or another. And that's I think why it's so important to build strong relationships, because those strong relationships and building that trust, and this is another thing that the Commission really emphasized, was that trust has been badly broken. And so how do you repair and build trust? You do that one step at a time in the everyday way that we work together. So I really think it's about recognizing that this is a way of living together, and recognizing that just like every other aspect of our lives, there are times we agree, there are times we choose to participate, times we don't, and that's all part of relationship. So I would just leave it at that.
We can squeeze in one more question if somebody's got another one here. It's okay, we do have time. And Lindsay, anything coming up online? No? Okay, I think that's got us. Again, thank you so much, Paulette.
Thank you very much.